Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you doing? Because I'm doing pretty crappy. It's Tuesday, March 12th, 2024. It was time for another show quite some time ago, and I wasn't able to get it up and running for a number of reasons, not the least of which was one of my family members has a doctor's appointment today, and it wasn't that we were there. It wasn't that we were on our way there. It was that they, of course, texted us, please fill out these forms, just these few little forms, before you arrive at the office today. Well, of course, we don't arrive until 12:15 later on today. And little did I know that 45 minutes before the show was too soon to begin filling out the few forms that they were asking for us to fill out. And of course, you know how the forms go, and I guess Greg can attest this, and anybody who's ever been to a medical office, I guess, can attest this. But I just understand, especially when the forms are digital, when they ask you the same thing over and over again, they can't import that data from anywhere else. What's the person's name who holds the insurance policy? Joe Smith. Yeah. What's Joe Smith's name? Joe Smith. No. His first name, Joe. Ah, okay, thank you. Last name, Smith. All right. And this Joe Smith, what's his name again? Yeah, I mean, like over and over again. Entering the same social security number 1,000 times, the same address over and over again. I just don't understand how they can't figure these things out. And I gather that this is for ease of use in the office, so that when they want to have the information on the person who holds the insurance policy, they can go right to that screen and all of that information is there. Now, why it can't be populated from the data that's elsewhere, I don't know. But, or maybe they just pull it out in paper form. I have no idea. And they need you to reproduce this stuff 100 times. 45 minutes into this, I am not done. And I'm going to have a few minutes after the show to fill out the rest of this stuff. And I don't even know if I can access the page again a second time because I just saved what I did. It's interesting that there's no save your progress on all of this because it takes so long to do. Wait a second. I'm done. I'm not done yet. I have to draw my signature in the box. I think I'm going to draw F-U. Just unbelievable how long this is taking me. And of course I'm drawing a signature with, a little touchpad, and you know what? Go to hell. Fine. Honest to God, at this point, don't treat us. We're not coming. Goodbye. I don't need you anymore. We'll find somebody else. I don't know whether this is going to submit or not. I've had this thing open for too long. Oh, am I nursing? No, I'm not nursing. I got to click that. All right. Anything else? I love these things too. Do you have cancer? If I have cancer, I'm not going to the oral surgeon today. I'm going to the oncologist. I know they need to know what, but honest to God, this is the most ridiculous stuff I've ever seen. And again, I don't know that this saved. I bet it didn't. And I'm going to have to do this all over again. What a piece of garbage. All right. Well, I don't know what else to tell you, but now I'm really pissed, and now we all hate the healthcare system altogether. By the way, so then I ran over to the computer to try to get everything up and running, of course, and I don't know, some kind of weird thing that only happens today happens in trying to open up the sound processing equipment, the big, I don't even know if I have the right settings today because I don't know. I can't even explain it. But normally all the stuff that comes up automatically, groggy, in my sleep, etc., etc. No screen like that today. What's the name of that screen? Can you close the application, reopen it? How come that didn't open as it has 900,000 times in a row? But not today. Not at 8:58 when I finally have to give up on these forms and run over to the computer and take care of this. I should have just quit the whole thing. Well, Justice will put some music on. I don't even have the relief of having Joan McCarter come today because she's too busy because she's got to cover another session of crap. She's covering Robert Hur is showing up for a hearing today. Jim Jordan has engineered himself a hearing, essentially. Can we impeach Joe Biden because he's really old or has no memory left? And can we just bring in this guy who says he can't remember anything? And I'm going to tell you that over and over and over again. I wonder how many forms he had to fill out in order to get this thing done. All right. Let's see. I guess I better set my alarms. Even though we came in late, we'll probably attempt, anyway, to exit the show at the appropriate break times. I think we can still get that done. Who knows? All right. Other things to share with you? I don't know. I also hate, sharp cheeses. I don't know if that really matters to you very much, but there you have it. Okay, I got to open up Pocket. I got to open up all the various inputs. They're not open because I have 17 pages of medical information open instead. Maybe I could just read you some of that too. How about if I give people my social security number 1,100 times in a row? Would everybody find that entertaining and helpful? Probably not. All right, well, let's see. I got to get all of these things open that are normally done well in advance because, of course, a doctor wanted my time well in advance instead. And I'm going to spend about 4 seconds with this doctor today, too. This is going to be really great. I might push him out the window. This is possible. Anything could happen. And if it was Russia, zoom, straight out the window. I can promise you that. All right. Oh, what else do I need to open up? What's the other social media thing we use? Right. That's it. Blue Sky. I'll open that up. We'll see if there's a friendly greeting from Mighty OCD. There it is. Okay. Let everybody know that we're on. I missed the Mastodon one if there was one today. There it is. Okay. Taking care of business. All this usually happens beforehand, except for the retweeting of Mighty OCD, which sometimes takes about half an hour for me to realize it's going on. All right. Yes. Good point made by, thank you, for the production assistance from Mighty OCD who says, without knowing that I wanted to, murder everybody, wanted to let me know that Robert Hur filled out some paperwork too. He filled out his resignation paperwork. It's true. This is a good point. I saw somebody else bring this to my attention yesterday. Thank you for putting me back on track here. He quit his job at the DOJ yesterday so that his testimony didn't have to be approved by, the bosses who are, of course, responsible to the guy he's trying to impeach, Joe Biden. So, a little bit of skullduggery there. Why didn't they arrange it so that he wasn't allowed to leave, but he was fired so he didn't get his pension? I don't know how long he's been a DOJ employee. Maybe he doesn't have a pension coming. But, of course, if you read Empty Wheel, you'll know that Hur was a key cog in the wheel that set, what's-his-name's dismissal in motion. Was it, damn it, now I can't even remember. Someone else will remember. There you go. Production staff, look up. What was that? McCabe? Was that it? Andrew McCabe? I don't know. I'm losing my mind at this point. Yeah, I think so. Andrew McCabe was the one who was pushed out by Trump, and they tried to make sure that they could fire him before he vested in his pension fully or at all. I don't remember exactly what the situation was. And Hur, whose name I misspelled throughout, I think, today's Morning Post, and that's fine. There's a second R in it. And I was going for the hers on first joke the whole day. And so, that's all out the window, too. But anyway, he filled out a bunch of paperwork, quit the DOJ so that he could testify as a private citizen. Could also, of course, take the Fifth Amendment if necessary. I don't really know what he would need to do. But he can screw around, essentially, at this hearing without implicating DOJ anymore. And he doesn't have to take any orders from DOJ like answer truthfully or you're going to be in trouble at your job. So that should make for a wild time and probably it probably indicates what the line of questioning is going to be like for a lot of the day from everybody else on the Democratic side. Does anybody want to know about some more health questions. Do I have any, maybe production help from this? Mighty OCD, Scott, if you want to chime in. Mom, if you want to chime in. Gil, you want to try out today? Do I have a prosthetic joint? I mean, no, right? Okay, so I'll say that. Oh, also, this isn't even my form. It's for my cat. They definitely don't have any prosthetic joints. How about any unhealed or recurrent injuries, ulcers, inflamed areas, growths, or sore spots in and around my mouth? I mean, at least it's oral surgery, so that makes some sense. I might be coming here for you to fix that. But the answer is no on that one. Let's see. Hospitalized in the last 5 years. Am I under the care of a physician? I'm trying, but you won't let me. I see. You mean some other physician. Am I under the care of a physician? Yes, but I'm sure if I check yes, they'll be like, well, what kind of cancer do you have? No, I'm under the care of a physician. Date of my last visit? I don't know. We ask the physician. You have their phone number and everything. So what are you asking me for? I don't know. I give up. Height, weight. By the way, more help. Anybody want to guess on whether or not I have had, or rather, my son has had rheumatic fever? That's probably a no. Damaged heart valves? No, also. Mitral valve prolapse? I mean, come on. Oh, well, anyway, I don't know what else to tell you. And of course, if there's any yeses, not like I have this information handy. I wonder whether I have to tick all of these things off in order for it to allow me to save the stupid thing. Well, how's it going, everybody? Okay, so there's some other things I wanted to tell you about, really, honestly. I had some other news, and did I put anything away about her and this resignation? I don't think so. But maybe we can look something up if we want to have a newspaper-type source. The thing that caught my eye yesterday, two things that I wanted to tell you. One I forgot to tell you yesterday is that, I guess on the good news front, Peter Navarro, who's bad news generally, has been ordered to report to prison. Yay! Finally. A week from today, I think. Yes. March 19th. He, of course, was convicted of contempt of Congress, and his appeals have been largely short-circuited. He's gone nowhere with any of this. And so I guess he's the first to... Is he the first of the Trump group to be convicted of contempt of Congress who will actually report to prison? Because Bannon was convicted a long time ago, but he's somehow managed to get himself tied up in a set of appeals that's still going on. Navarro, according to The Hill, Ella Lee in particular over at The Hill, once an economic advisor, not Lee, but Navarro, an advisor to President Trump, has been ordered to report to a Miami prison. He's got a nice vacation of a prison there. I don't know what it's like there, but it's in Miami. Come on. March 19th, to begin serving a 4-month sentence for refusing to comply with a congressional investigation into the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Navarro is 74, of course. Too old! You can't go. Anyway, he was convicted last year on 2 counts of contempt of Congress, one for failing to produce documents related to the probe, and another for skipping his deposition. His lawyers wrote in a Sunday court filing that the federal appeals court should temporarily put his sentence on hold while he appeals his conviction. If that effort fails, he could become the first, there's the answer, key Trump advisor to serve jail time over efforts to overturn the 2020 election. U.S. District Judge Amit Mehta, who oversaw Navarro's trial, declined to allow the Trump ally to stay out of prison while the appellate process plays out. Why in prison down in Miami? I'm not really sure. Amit Mehta sits, as I recall, here in D.C. The crime presumably committed in D.C. I really don't know what the situation is. Why Miami? Maybe by arrangement. Does he live down in Florida now? And he wants people to be able to visit him and smuggle a file in a cake or something like that. And they shouldn't have to travel so far. Anyway, Navarro's counsel had argued that the question of executive privilege, which Navarro claimed Trump invoked over any testimony to the House January 6th panel, rises to that threshold. That is the threshold of, I don't know what, of important enough to keep him at a prison pending appeal, I guess. The judge disagreed, ruling last month that Navarro's appeal does not raise a substantial question of law and therefore doesn't warrant his release. Ex-White House advisor Steve Bannon, also convicted on 2 counts of contempt of Congress last year and sentenced to 4 months in prison, but a different judge said he could remain free pending appeal somehow. Bannon argued his case before a federal appeals court in November and still has not served any time. At trial, prosecutors asserted Navarro showed utter disregard for the House committee's probe and utter contempt for the rule of law. Well, he has that. The committee was investigating, of course, an attack on the very foundation of our democracy, Assistant U.S. Attorney John Crabb said. There's a new name for us. 2 B's in that one. 2 B's or not? All right. Okay. There could be no more serious investigation undertaken by Congress. And there probably never will be. Anyway, Navarro told the judge during his sentencing that he had an honest belief, I doubt it was honest, that executive privilege had been invoked by Trump, a matter Mehta precluded him from using as a defense at trial. Now that you know you don't, will you testify? No, I really think I do. Well, probably going to lose on that one. The ex-Trump advisor's lawyers wrote court filings that Mehta's decision hamstrung Navarro's defense by leaving open the question of whether a president can direct his subordinates not to testify before Congress. After his conviction last year, Navarro told reporters his case could reach the Supreme Court due to the questions it raises about executive privilege for high-ranking White House staff. But then again, it might not. So there you go. And it's not looking particularly likely at this point, since one, he's likely going to prison, but he's appealing to an appellate court, trying to keep himself out of prison. That's a stage before anything would get to the Supreme Court, and there's probably no reason for the Supreme Court to take up an appeal on whether or not to stay his sentencing or his incarceration pending further appeals of his conviction. So, all right. We'll see. I guess anything that keeps these clowns out of jail is possible given this Supreme Court, and we should probably keep an eye out for that happening. Okay, let's see. Other things I wanted to tell you about today. Lara Trump now moving in, drapes measured, et cetera, over at the Republican National Committee. She's been installed as co-chair there, and I gather in a role that authorizes her to authorize Trump himself, Donald Trump, to empty the coffers there at the RNC and use RNC funds to pay for his legal defense and possibly also, I don't know, also pay off some or all of, I don't think they can pay anything close to all of the fines, but they might be able to contribute towards the fines he has to pay, both in the E. Jean Carroll case and the New York fraud case, anything he has to pay. The UK, where he's now on the hook for defamation of Chris Steele, et cetera. He's lost on so many fronts. He owes well over $500 million now to all the various plaintiffs. And, there's no chance that the RNC has any cash like that. But whatever they can grab, they will. It puts me back in mind of, I don't know what the law is on some of these things, like the real nitty-gritty of some of these laws. I have a general sense of what's generally legal and what's not, but, throw it all out the window. It doesn't matter whether it's legal or not. You're talking about a guy who is running for president on the platform that he will pardon himself from all his federal crimes. And for all we know, may very well likely also claim the power to pardon himself from state crimes as well, because he's the president. And everybody knows that the president is the most powerful guy ever. Just ask anybody. The presidency is very, very powerful. Very powerful. Very powerful. And you can pardon yourself from state crimes too because of how awesome and powerful you are. Besides, these are the United States. I mean, think about it. The Supreme Court could very well come down. We can't have a patchwork of 50 different states that are able to charge the president of the United States with various crimes. It needs to be a federal issue all the time, even if if it's a state murder rap. If he does in fact shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, New York hasn't got the right to indict him on murder. It's part of the United States. If 5 black magic robes say it, then all of our understanding of how the criminal law works in the federalism system is out the window. And what they say goes, and where are you going to appeal to? Exactly. So, I was going to say, I don't know the law about some of these things, but it puts me in mind of this play. And I mean, it's so outrageous that I think, once again, we ought to state it again and be on the lookout for it, and then we can claim to be geniuses when he actually pulls this stunt. Was just wondering, I know we've gotten away from it in past election cycles because of the amount of money that people are able to raise outside of the old campaign finance system, but Trump's strapped for cash. Why not apply for federal matching funds and see if you can force the United States to use federal government money to pay for Trump's defense and possibly any fines that might arise from his offenses against those same United States, or, by the way, from some of the state charges that are pending against him as well. Just steal the money out of the U.S. Treasury, say it's for his campaign, but as his campaign and the RNC have all declared that all funds are usable, anything that falls into their sphere of influence, and that falls into their gravitational pull, will be sucked up and spent on, anything he wants. I suppose he could always just refurbish Pervalago with it as well and just say that they were legal expenses. I don't know. Whatever Lara will approve. Anyway, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't do that. I mean, except for the fact that it's against the law to do that. But I mean, if you're going to pardon yourself, who effing cares? And also, even if you're not, who effing cares? Because the law doesn't apply to me, and da-da-da-da-da. And, he's running to pardon himself. And as we speculated, I think, the other day when we were thinking about it, there's supposedly lots of restrictions on what you can spend and how much and how it can be spent if you buy into the federal campaign finance system that includes matching funds. But again, F all of that, because you're never going to charge me, and if you do, I'm going to pardon myself anyway. Or if, whatever, order the FEC to drop the charges. Not that, and I don't even know if the FEC is the correct enforcement agency, but I mean, insofar as they do or are supposed to enforce things, that they don't, because they're always hopelessly deadlocked about everything anyway. So even regular candidates know that blatant violations of campaign finance laws don't result in any sort of serious punishment. Occasionally a fine, but then they go out and raise that money on the internet and give it to give the paltry sum to the Treasury, what have you. And I suppose if he's raiding the Treasury and just taking all the money anyway, what's the difference? It all just moves around in circles. So yes, Lara Trump has moved in at the RNC. The Washington Post has reported on it. And the immediate effect of that is they are firing almost everybody at the RNC, which ordinarily I cheer as good news. It'll mean an RNC in disarray just months before a presidential election. That's not a bad thing. Of course, they'll replace everybody with Trump loyalists, so the place will run like a well-oiled machine, so long as you understand that the purpose of this machine is to steal all the money. It won't be able to meet any deadlines or, file paperwork or coordinate work between the states or provide any assistance to state parties or anything like that, because all the money is going to be stolen. So there you have it. RNC fires dozens of employees after Trump-backed leadership takes over. And by Trump-backed leadership, we mean a Trump is going to be leading it. I don't know why they didn't just go right ahead and say that. Josh Dawsey and Patrick Svitek might have had something to do with choosing their headline, maybe not. About 60 people were told they were no longer employed, according to a person with direct knowledge. And basically, it comes down to this. So the too long didn't read is we are in with Lara Trump's salary from the RNC and out with yours, because Lara Trump needs nothing, but is going to suck up all the cash that was once used to pay you to do professional work at the Republican National Committee. That's all over. Just hope you know it. The new leadership team at the Republican National Committee, picked by former President Donald Trump, started firing dozens of employees days after taking over. You're fired. You're fired. He didn't even get to do it. Here it was easy, and he didn't. They should have recorded him. Just to remind people, you remember when he was on television and he did that whole thing, and that's why you elected him president? Anyway, there you go. So lots of people fired, a lot of people who, I don't know whether they intend to rehire them or not, but they used the corporate trick of everybody has to resign, and if you think you should continue working here, you're invited to reapply for your job. We might not give it to you, but go ahead and give it a shot. So anyway, let's see. About 60 people were told they were no longer employed. One of the people familiar with the firing said data, political, and communications staffers were affected, and notifications were made on Monday by Chris LaCivita, the senior Trump advisor who was at the RNC's Capitol Hill headquarters. He had complained about half the staff of the RNC for several months. People who spoke to him said, and he long planned to make these changes. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, fighting with the mute button with one hand while trying to tick off no to every known medical condition under the sun. And although at this point I'm a little concerned, this is, of course, form is not for me, but if it were for me, once we now have gotten down to mental health problems, yes, no, I'm beginning to suspect the answer might be yes, after all. Okay, well, let's see. So far I've been having plenty of fun answering no. Any family history of unusual, serious reactions to anesthesia? No, but I am thinking of jumping out the window, and that's not really anesthesia. Okay, on to the medications. Blood thinners, Coumadin, I don't even know. Aspirin, have you ever taken any aspirin? Are you taking any? I have a headache. Yes. Plavix, Pradaxa, Xarelto, Ginkgo, diet pills. This is for oral surgery. This is for a consult, getting your wisdom teeth taken out. Have you now, or are you now or ever on pick a Ginkgo? Yeah, I don't know. No, I don't think so. What do you mean? The tree? Did I eat a tree? What's happening here? Well, I know how to pronounce the drugs that they were stealing at the White House medical office now, but none of these anyway. And let's see, then we have to go, I got to fill out all the, are we allergic to soy, latex, egg yolk, sulfites? I don't know. No, I guess, again, 25 minutes of this. Here's the fifth time they're asking about whether or not we have cancer. Yes, we all have cancer. It took us so long to fill out these forms. I started as an 18-year-old, and then by the time I was done, I was 79 and I had cancer. Oh my God, this is crazy. And it still won't take the damn thing. I'm hitting submit. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to have to bring my laptop with me and show when I'm going to get there and they're going to cry. You didn't fill out the forms ahead of time. Oh, but I did. Oh, did I ever. And you were nowhere to be found. So thanks very much. All right. Well, back to the news. Where is it? I don't know. It's hidden behind all these forums. I think that's pretty much it. There's more on... Do we care about the RNC? Look, they installed Lara Trump as co-chair. The other co-chair is, what's his name? Whatley, right? Michael Whatley from North Carolina. He's a Trump lunatic who I guess was head of the North Carolina party, which is, dangerously fascist, et cetera, et cetera. And this will cause problems, but for them as well as for everybody else in the country. Let's see. The RNC, it says, is at a crossroads at a critical election year. I bet you didn't know that. According to a January campaign finance filing, it had a historically low $8.7 million cash on hand, compared with $24 million at the Democratic National Committee. Doesn't really make sense to compare them, but it does make sense to point out $8.7 million in cash. That's less than usual, so the Trumps will be able to steal less than they would have been able to steal in prior years. More broadly, Trump and his allies are racing to close that fundraising gap with Biden and his affiliated groups, except they took in $10 million after the State of the Union just the other day, so they're behind by that much more. We have to raise a lot of money, Lara Trump said on Friday. Whatley, the North Carolina chair, replaced Ronna McDaniel as RNC chair, a post she's held since 2017. Trump had also helped install her in the job, but he soured on her, and she offered to leave earlier this year. It was unclear how much money the firings would save. Zero is how much money it will save. The real question is how much money will now be available to transfer to Lara Trump's bank account. And that's, what did we say earlier? $8.7 million. All the cash on hand can now go to her, and it's official. And I was thinking about it last night, just trying to theorize. Ordinarily, we'd say this is against the rules at the very least. It may also be illegal. I don't know. But if you can install a co-chair who will give the rubber stamp to this, and I believe they also held elections. They also essentially arranged for the election of Trump maniacs to a vast majority of the seats on the actual Republican National Committee itself. And if you get to that point, if you're able to engineer the election of a majority of people who will vote on the committee level to authorize this sort of looting, I'm not certain that there's anything that could be legally done about it or under the rules that could be done about it. It's just, that's the way you chose to organize your party. That's not a great idea, but you've done it. As long as you then follow the rule book, I suppose, there might not even be anything legally speaking that can be done about it. Although it does raise the possibility of running afoul of various other laws if you were going to obey any of them. But that's not clear either. But, for instance, I don't know, now that Trump may or may not be collecting money from overseas, and there may or may not be people, overseas sources of cash putting up money to back up bonds that he's posting in the legal system, things like that. If the Saudis or the Russians, for instance, were to put up cash either directly to pay his fines or pay his bonds, or as collateral against bonds, and he was habitually commingling those funds with funds looted from the RNC in order to pay his legal fees and or fines along with it, then I suppose you could be sitting there arguing, well, every time the Russians send money to pay off his fines, that if they send him $1 million and he uses it to pay off his fines, but he was commingling everything, that is presumably $1 million that remains in the coffers of the RNC and doesn't have to be stolen out of there in order to make payments on bonds or legal fees. And should you assume that that's some sort of in-kind contribution to the Republican National Committee being made by Russian mobsters now? Well, ordinarily that's a bridge too far, and you probably wouldn't stretch it like that unless they had made some direct contribution to the RNC. But if you're commingling all the funds, money's fungible. It's arguable. We've just never had to make that argument before because, of course, you would never commingle funds like that, except now they are. So, I don't know. You tell me. Let's see. There was a hint yesterday also that Trump could land himself in yet more trouble for continuing to mouth off with respect to E. Jean Carroll's case and the judge involved in it. The New York Times has some reporting on that from Benjamin Weiser, Ben Protas, and Maggie Haberman because, career maker, as you know. For Trump, a blizzard of court action is just another Monday. That's what it says. The subheader reads, a lawyer for E. Jean Carroll suggested that she could sue the former president again. And his lawyers filed a last-ditch request to delay his upcoming Manhattan criminal trial as well. So, action in two different cases on this one. For anyone but Donald J. Trump, Monday's legal docket would have induced dizziness. In the morning, a lawyer for the writer E. Jean Carroll suggested that she might sue Mr. Trump for defamation for a third time. By lunch, it emerged that Mr. Trump's lawyers had mounted a last-ditch effort to delay his upcoming criminal trial in Manhattan. And by evening, the New York Attorney General asked an appeals court to maintain a $454 million judgment against Trump in yet another case. It was a flurry of legal activity that in a single day demonstrated the remarkable breadth of Mr. Trump's legal entanglements, i.e., don't elect him. It would be disaster. Oh well. He is not only standing trial this month on criminal charges, making him the first former American president to face prosecution, but is also fighting 3 other criminal cases and several civil lawsuits, all at a time when he's poised to lock up the Republican presidential nomination. Good party you have there. Even for a man who is no stranger to legal woes, this is an unparalleled situation. Ms. Carroll's lawyer raised the prospect of a new lawsuit after Trump in recent days repeatedly lashed out at her, using the same kind of disparaging language that led to an $83.3 million judgment against him in January. The statute of limitations for defamation in most jurisdictions is between 1 and 3 years. Roberta Kaplan, Ms. Carroll's lawyer, said in a statement on Monday morning, as we said after the last jury verdict, we continue to monitor every statement that Donald Trump makes about our clients. And why not? It's worth money. In a separate court filing, Ms. Kaplan told the federal judge overseeing the case that she and Mr. Trump's lawyers had reached an agreement on the details of a proposed $91.6 million bond that Trump recently posted. The bond, provided by Federal Insurance Company, an arm of the insurance giant Chubb, would prevent Ms. Carroll from collecting her $83.3 million judgment while Mr. Trump appeals the defamation verdict. The bond is higher than the judgment because the former president is also responsible for interest. The judge, Lewis Kaplan, not related to Ms. Kaplan, the lawyer, must still approve the proposed bond, which he could do as early as this week. The race to secure the bond came as Trump was on the clock to obtain a bond for another huge judgment in a civil fraud case brought by the New York Attorney General, Letitia James. In that case, of course, Trump must post nearly a $500 million bond by March 25th, if you're counting down. So what is that? Another 13 days, a little under 2 weeks. 1 day under 2 weeks from now. Or the Attorney General's office can begin seizing his assets while he appeals. That sounds fun. Mr. Trump, who was found liable last month for fraudulently inflating his net worth, has asked an appeals court to pause that $454 million judgment while he mounts his appeal. But on Monday, Ms. James urged the court to deny his request, arguing that Trump's appeal was exceedingly unlikely to succeed on the merits. Trump lacks the cash to come up with both bonds at once, placing him in financial peril unless the appeals court grants him a reprieve. Although the former president boasts of his billions, his net worth is derived largely from the value of his real estate, which he was lying about the whole time. That's why he's in court in the first place. He has more than $350 million in cash, a recent New York Times analysis found, far short of what he needs to obtain bonds in both cases. An appeal bond is a promise from a company that offers it to cover a judgment if a defendant, in this case, Mr. Trump, loses an appeal and fails to pay. In exchange, Trump must pay the company a premium and pledge collateral, including as much cash as possible. Trump has twice attacked Ms. Carroll in recent days, using the type of language that has led to 2 defamation findings against him, most recently the jury's $83.3 million award in January. On Saturday evening, at a rally in Rome, Georgia, Trump complained bitterly about the bond he had to post, insisted Ms. Carroll's accusations were false, and said that she was, quote, not a believable person. Trump doubled down on those remarks Monday morning during a telephone interview with CNBC, mocking Ms. Carroll as Ms. Bergdorf Goodman, a reference to the luxury department store in Manhattan where she said Mr. Trump raped her in the mid-1990s. Very nice. In an earlier trial last year, a federal civil jury found Mr. Trump liable for sexually abusing Ms. Carroll there, that is to say Bergdorf Goodman, and defaming her years later. In the CNBC interview, Trump called the decisions against him ridiculous, without elaboration. I got charged. I was given a false accusation, and I had to post a $91 million bond on a false accusation, Mr. Trump said. He was, in fact, not criminally charged in the case. In the Manhattan criminal case, it's set to go to trial on March 25th. Also the date of the bond coming due. Trump is accused of covering up a potential sex scandal during and after the 2016 presidential campaign. That case, brought by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, is the first of Trump's 4 criminal indictments to move to trial. That's the Stormy Daniels bribe. With his other criminal cases mired in the appeals process and other delays, it might be the only one to go to trial before Election Day. The trial in Trump's Washington criminal case, which involves accusations that he, plotted to overturn the 2020 election, and of course also stole all those documents, that doesn't even get mentioned anymore. But the Supreme Court agreed to consider whether he's immune from prosecution on charges involving official acts he took while president, throwing the trial into doubt. Trump's lawyers have also made a last-ditch effort to delay the Manhattan trial. In court papers made public on Monday, they argued that the judge overseeing the case should wait to hold the trial until after the Supreme Court has ruled on immunity, which might not happen until June. President Trump is entitled to immunity from prosecution based on evidence of official acts that he undertook during his first term in office, his lawyers wrote. The judge in that case, Juan Merchan, is unlikely to grant that request. The issue of the state proceedings, I don't believe, is for the Supreme Court, he said in a recent hearing. Mr. Trump's request to delay the Manhattan trial was hardly his first attempt to play the timing of the cases against each other. On Monday, his lawyers also asked the judge overseeing the federal criminal case in Florida, Aileen Cannon, where he stands accused of mishandling classified documents, to give them an extra 10 days to file a round of court papers, citing their need to prepare for his trial in Manhattan. Okay, so yes, I've misstated here. The Washington case doesn't include the stolen documents. That's being conducted in Florida, though it is being prosecuted by Jack Smith, who is also handling the Washington prosecution for the coup attempt. Just to try to keep things straight. It's a lot more difficult to do if you don't remind yourself from time to time which one's which. But it's difficult to remember even if you do. All right, let's see. There's definitely a couple of things I've parked here that, for whatever reason, are unidentified because they came from Twitter or from Blue Sky, and I left them here for... Oh, yes, right. Here's one that came from the bad place, Twitter, where Twitter follower pal who's still there, and who tweets under the handle of, Redux STL, I don't know what that stands for. Anything in particular, STL? St. Louis, perhaps, or maybe even a shorter abbreviation for Seattle, or have nothing whatsoever to do with it. Could be your initials for all I know. At any rate, Redux says that he was listening to the show last week, and he got these corrections in at the end of last week, But just noting some nitpicks about this week's podcast, last week's now. Paraphrasing, you said they didn't put all the budget bills in the omnibus, and it's not like omni means all. You remember this discussion? And of course, yeah, we did hit on this. Yeah, omni means all. That's absolutely true. But yeah, just trying to clarify all of that stuff about when they call a bill an omnibus. But they're pretty loose with it, and it's sort of a casual usage. Do you remember this? That was not super important, but now I guess Ringwist can chime in and clear these things up for us. But sometimes when they have the regular 12 appropriations bills, but if you've actually already passed in regular order, say 2 of them, and there are 10 that are remaining, it was sometimes the case back then that if they were on the verge of passing, say, another 2, such that there were 8 that were troublesome, and they bundled 8 of them together, they would still call it an omnibus, even though it didn't include the other 2 that were still then pending, but for whatever reason were held out separate. But then, yeah, when they started to do, this is one that will handle 6 of the 12 or 3 of the 12, they began calling them mini buses instead of omnibuses. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. More importantly, he wanted to point out that, I guess, we made an offhand joking reference since somebody was saying something about the IRS monitoring them, and we made a joke about the 80s song, Who's Watching Me? Is that right? Or Somebody's Watching Me, or I don't know what the actual title is. And I was trying to remember who sang that. Anyway, was it Cameo? And I got it wrong. It wasn't Cameo. Cameo, by the way, more famous. I had to look them up. Well, who are they? Why are they famous? They had a lot of songs, and I'm sure they would resent being called a one-hit wonder. But the one you might remember was they did Word Up. Do you remember that one? Don't ask me to sing, please. Word Up. But that was Cameo. It was Rockwell. Rockwell was the artist behind Somebody's Watching Me. And, yeah, he too may object to being called a one-hit wonder. But, the thing about shoes and things that fit, etc. Anyway, there you have it. Rockwell. Somebody's Watching Me. And right now, probably nobody's watching you, Rockwell. But at least you had your time in the sun. And we all remember you if we were alive anyway. Okay, let's see. What else came in via Blue Sky? Why did I put this? Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, I can't use that one just now, I don't think, without further searching. Or maybe I can. It's a clip from Seth Meyers. And I was reminded to possibly use it yesterday when Greg was having us play all the various clips that were taken from the TV broadcast. And this was, it was just a good, recounting of, I guess Seth Meyers used a moment on the show to remind everybody of exactly what it was that we were looking at in terms of the charges pending against Donald Trump and just how bad, I guess, for the country he would be. But is this it? Is this the video from it? Can I play this? I can't tell you whether or not that's going to work. No, it's clicked over to an ad from Brand Power, so we always love those. But is this going to play this is one of those newspaper articles where you can't tell whether something is a screenshot or
now the
here we go.
GOP.
Yeah, there we go. Or really something playable. This is over at The Independent, the UK publication. But here we got 59 seconds of, I'm sure, copyrighted video. So we'll stop it now and again to see whether it upsets YouTube or not. Although they didn't seem to get too upset about yesterday's show. They haven't yet notified me that they won't monetize it, but don't worry about it because monetizing an episode of my show, it doesn't work. They don't monetize anyway. So let's see. But this is Seth Meyers, I guess, explaining the situation.
Well, here we are, you guys. Donald Trump is now the presumptive GOP nominee for president again for a third time, despite the fact that he's a twice impeached, 4-time criminal indictee and racist who's been found liable for fraud and sexual abuse, banned from doing business in the state of New York for 3 years, owes over $500 million in fine, took millions from foreign governments while he was president, tried to extort a foreign country to interfere in an election in 2020, and encouraged another to help him win in 2016, actively undermined the nation's response to a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, and let a deadly disease spiral out of control. It's about to go on trial for breaking campaign finance laws by paying hush money to cover up an affair during the 2016 campaign. Orchestrated a months-long coup attempt that culminated in a violent insurrection to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power and install him as an unelected dictator. Stole classified documents and obstructed attempts to get them back. Has never once won the popular vote and has been routinely rejected by a majority of Americans in election after election.
There you have it. Okay. Well, whoa. Oh, my goodness. Of course, that left the volume way up. We'll probably edit that little blast out, but I figured that was going to happen. You got to turn the volume up all the way in order to hear these things. And, of course, they give you about half a second to turn it off before something else explodes in your ears. Okay. Now I have to go back to the medical forms and tick off hearing damage. That was pretty disruptive in my headphones. Anyway, just thought I would add that one, and I was holding on to it, and that does the trick. And also, by the way, helps illustrate the importance of having a studio audience for the response to the State of the Union or anything else. Having that laughter, or even a laugh track, makes a very, very big difference in how we perceive the message. All right, let's see. A few other things. Back to Pocket. It's a little harder to find today with all these different tabs open. But let's see. Why not add this legal analysis to our pile of things for read? Although it does look like it's an awfully long read, and we are coming up to the top of the hour break. So I don't know that anything actually fits in before we get to the break, but I don't know. I was handed this other interesting thing, although who brought this one to my attention via social media, that one I can no longer dig up. But since we were, since we were over at The Independent, why not take a visit over to The Guardian as well for more UK takes? This, an interesting, investigative report from The Guardian revealed... That's what happens when you investigate things. Revealed U.S. conservative think tank's link to extremist fraternal order. And why not? Let's name some more names and get some more names on the record here, even if it takes us over to the other side of the break. Claremont Institute officials. And Claremont is where Eastman is parked, right? Jason Wilson reporting again here for The Guardian. Claremont Institute officials closely involved with the Society for American Civic Renewal, very benign sounding, which experts say is rooted in Christian nationalism. Oh no. Well, here's what he's got for us. The president of the right-wing Claremont Institute and another senior Claremont official are both closely involved with the shadowy Society for American Civic Renewal. That's shadowy, so we have shadowy type music that goes with that. I don't know how shadowy they are, but that's what they're saying. The Society for American Civic Renewal, an exclusive men-only fraternal order. Men only.
That is not how this works!
Okay, well, you say so. But men-only fraternal order, which aims to replace the U.S. government with an authoritarian-aligned regime, and which experts say is rooted in extreme Christian nationalism and religious autocracy. One of the most amazing things, and this goes along with the worrying about Trump taking federal matching funds, in a sense, right? These guys are dedicated to the proposition of replacing the U.S. government with an authoritarian-aligned regime, but they are a tax-exempt educational organization and nonprofit, and I guess, and just raking in whatever they got, from who knows who, and what kind of donors disclosure do they have to do? I don't know, but we're underwriting, the federal government underwriting the work of a group dedicated to its replacement. Well, free speech and all, whatever. The revelations emerged from documents gathered in public records requests, including emails between several senior members of SACR, Claremont President Ryan P. Williams, its Director of State Coalitions, and Boise State University Professor Scott Yaynor, and others, including former soap manufacturer and would-be warlord Charles Haywood, and I don't know where that comes from. I wonder if that's one of the guys we've read about in the past. Would be warlord. That rings a bell for me, and of course it rings a bell for my own terminology that I use on social media and here discussing the descent into American warlordism, or occasionally labeling things American Mogadishu. We are only that far from it. And a warlord, what's the difference between a warlord and the leader of a patriot militia? And the answer is nothing. It's just a label we hang on things. Why do we call one a caravan and one a convoy? Don't know. Just because we're trying to avoid negative connotations, I guess. All right. Well, anyway, this trove of documents also contain an internal, and that's in scare quotes, internal SACR mission statement with a far more radical edge than the public vision now recorded on the organization's website. Let's take a look at that before jumping out for the break. That document speaks of recruiting a, quote, brotherhood, remember they're all male here, who will form the backbone of a renewed American regime. And why it would be renewed, I don't know. It would be a completely new American regime replacing the legitimate government of the United States. But anyway, it's renewed because that sounds good. And who understand the nature of authority and its legitimate forceful exercise by overthrowing the actual government, of course, whose objectives include to collect, curate, and document a list of potential appointees and hires for a renewed American regime. It actually sounds like they want to adopt the form of the current government, but just fill it with authoritarians. Maybe that actually makes some sense. I mean, bad idea, though. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. By the way, I don't know, just going on now regarding not yet, right? They're just beginning, I think, the hearing where her testimony will be given. Get it? Anyway, Mighty OCD pointing out, I guess, probably related to it later on, this section of the deposition, I guess the transcript of the deposition that her took of President Biden, based upon which he's, I guess, going to be making the case he's super old. But this excerpt, Mighty OCD found to be funny. It's an exchange between them in which her says, so let me show you some photographs behind tab 24. He's speaking to President Biden here. And these will be a series of photographs. It starts with the second one behind that. Second one in that section. The first Bates is, and he gives a number. The Bates number is just the number of each document. They number every piece of evidence and every page of things, in a way, so, so that you can identify various things, and it gives the number here. The first number is 1B011223. It's a whole long series of numbers. President Biden says, okay. It's interesting too, like, oh, he's senile. He can't remember how many numbers or which number is which. Just to give you a flavor of it, when you're shortening it and you're speaking in shorthand and cutting off some of the repetitive first numbers, her says there's some other photos here. 1223174, 1223084. Oh gosh, you can't keep the numbers straight. How senile? Anyway, President Biden with the comeback saying, speaking of the photos he's looking at there, you can tell it's old. I have my arm around Lindsey Graham. So that hasn't happened for many, many years, and with good reason. He went crazy like about 12 years ago. Anyway, there you go. So some humor relevant to the hearing, just getting underway now if they are on schedule. So now back over to the Guardian article about the Society for American Civic Renewal. They had this idea that, if we keep the form, perhaps, of the old government, fill it with authoritarians. I said, well, that makes more sense, just in terms of, now I understand what they're trying to do here. And they have a better case, I guess, at keeping their tax exemption. Now, we're not looking to overthrow the government. We're simply going to change the way it works by filling it with like-minded authoritarians who will all decide that whatever we say goes. but they'll be wearing 5 of those black robes when they do it, or wearing a suit and tie and sitting in an office that says secretary of whatever when they do it. And then it'll all be okay. Anyway, makes sense in terms of understanding the organization, but still a bad idea in terms of being authoritarian. So this document, their renewal document, does not indicate that such a renewal will take place through participation in electoral contests, nor does it make mention of the U.S. Constitution. Usually they're kind of important. Along with the financial links between the SACR and Claremont, The Guardian previously reported Claremont's $26,248 donation to the SACR in 2020. The documents raise question as to what extent SACR is an initiative of the Claremont Institute, and to what extent its participants have abandoned liberal, secular, or democratic politics. The Guardian contacted Ryan Williams, Claremont's president, for comment on his involvement in SACR and on the extent of Claremont's ties to the organization. In an email, he said, while the Claremont Institute acted as a fiscal sponsor to help the Society for American Civic Renewal establish itself as an incorporated 501c10, not C4 as we're usually, or C3 or C4 as we're usually used to hearing, but C10, so we can go look that up. That was the end of any corporate collaboration between the Claremont Institute and SACR, so they washed their hands of it so that they don't get arrested, I guess. He added, as a founding board member of SACR, no, you're still on the hook then, in my personal capacity, obviously I think that a fraternal order dedicated to civic and cultural renaissance and rooted in community virtue and wisdom is a very good thing. Whereas the cultural activity involved in the overthrow of the existing system of government, maybe not so great, but I didn't mention that one. Williams also confirmed that he continues to serve as an SACR board member, so lock him up, that's fine. The Guardian also contacted Scott Yaner and Boise State University for comment. Heidi Berich, maybe I'm pronouncing it right, who knows, co-founder of the Global Project on Hate and Extremism, presumably in opposition to hate and extremism, said of the SACR documents, their planned regime is obviously far from a multiracial democracy. The documents appear to be describing a religious autocracy. Laura K. Field, a writer, political theorist, and senior fellow at Niskanen Center, a Washington think tank. I think that's where Rachel Bidikofer went to eventually, right? Said the documents expressed extreme Christian nationalism, not just regular. This is like supersized extreme Christian nationalism, where a particular kind of Christianity should dominate as an ideal, and that it should dominate permanently. Now, a new section here called Yaner and SACR. Scott Yaner is a professor of political science at Idaho's Boise State University and simultaneously the senior director of state coalitions at the Claremont Institute. His Claremont appointment came in February of 2023. Media reports at that time indicated that Yaner would be working closely with the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, and DeSantis-aligned legislators. When the job was announced, the governor's wife, Casey DeSantis, tweeted, thrilled to welcome Scott Yaner to the Claremont Institute, to his new home from the Claremont Institute, to his new home in Tallahassee. Oh. But yet Boise or something. I don't know. These guys, it's a real trend among these lunatic Republican governors to essentially import their appointees from any state. They don't have to be people from that state anymore, right? Libs of TikTok is going to run education in Oklahoma, and Chris Rufo is going to run education in Florida, though he doesn't live there. And now Scott Yaner, too, is going to do something in Tallahassee, but do it from Boise. Reporting in, we can't have this patchwork. I'm telling you. Anyway, stupid Supreme Court reference there. Reporting in the New York Times last month put Yaner at the center of a network of activists tied to Claremont and other right-wing nonprofits to wage an anti-DEI crusade. That sounds like Rufo is involved there. It's, of course, against diversity, equity, and inclusion measures in educational institutions and pretty much everywhere else, corporations and public agencies. Unreported until now, is Yaner's place as an ideological and organizational leader at SACR and the radical nature of that organization's aims as understood by he and other core members. SACR is structured as a 501c10 body under the section of the U.S. tax law that provides nonprofit status for organizations with a fraternal purpose. So if your purpose is ritual satanic murder, but it's all guys, 501c10. There you go. In 2020, the umbrella organization was incorporated in Indiana with Charles Haywood as a principal, and the first local lodge, like water buffaloes, was established in Dallas, Texas. Okay. Subsequently, 3 local lodges were established in Idaho, Boise, and Coeur d'Alene in 2021. And did we decide at one point that the name of the town that looks like Moscow, but they pronounce it some different way, Moscow, or isn't that the way the Russians pronounce it too? I don't know. Anyway, I forget how you pronounce the Idaho version of it, but maybe one of you guys knows, or maybe it's in my medical forms. I should take a look. Tick yes, no. Do you know how to pronounce the following? Anyway, Idaho company filings show that Scott Yaner became president and the only listed principal officer of the Boise Lodge on August 5th, 2023. So sometimes it's all like the Libertarian Party. No one shows up, so you name yourself president, CEO, vice president, secretary as well. Fill out all the healthcare forms for the organization. Secrecy at SACR is next. Emails indicate that Yaner had taken on a board role in the national organization even earlier than August of 2023. January 25th, 2023, lawyer Clyde Taylor, now at Wagenmaker Law. Well, it's Wagen, Wagenmacher Law. But until 2019, an associate at the right-wing litigation firm, the Wisconsin, they're all over the place, Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, wrote to Haywood and Skylar Cresson about their trademark application for the SACR logo. So they were in the works in 2019, I guess is what that's supposed to show. Haywood forwarded the lawyer's email to Yaner, Claremont President Williams, and Nathaniel Nate Fisher, copying in Cresson on 2 addresses, including one hosted at SACR's sacr.us domain. All right. We should probably have a board meeting to discuss this, finances, etc., Haywood wrote in response to Yaner, suggesting Yaner and he and the others were copied in as members of that body. Haywood added a suggestion on encrypted messaging services, indicating an imperative of secrecy inside SACR. Whoops. I vote we create a new signal group and have a board meeting. Any takers? He said. The group was then set up. They sound like they really know what they're doing parliamentary-wise. I vote we do it. Yeah, okay. Anyway, The Guardian reported last August that on his website, Haywood had repeatedly envisioned serving as a, quote, warlord at the head of an armed patronage network, which might at some point find itself in conflict with the federal government. Haywood has also expressed a desire to recruit shooters. I wonder what that means. To help defend that should be in quotes, defend. The, quote, extended, quite sizable compound, unquote, he occupies on the western fringe of Carmel, Indiana. Don't know if they say caramel. Carmel, Indiana. Anyway, according to documents lodged with the city of Carmel, which is not caramel, of course, the latest construction project on Haywood's compound is a 6-bedroom faux classical mansion. Everything's faux, of course, with a central library room that occupies most of the building's floors and probably has no books in it because they've all been banned. He has funded SACR through his, I don't even know where this comes from. Ladies and gentlemen, he has funded SACR through his Howdy Doody Good Times Foundation. Honest to God, I am not kidding. That is astonishing, to say the least. And I don't know whether he has anything to do with the old time television show, and maybe that's where Family Money came from or something. I really don't know. But I hope that's explained somewhere, but if not, it would just be a funny thing. Like if you're just trying to avoid detection and not be, you name everything some benign thing, Society for American Civic Renewal. How can you object to that? Where's the money come from, huh? Evil Incorporated? No, it comes from the Howdy Doody Good Times Foundation. Well, then, it must be, all's good here. Howdy Doody. Everyone loves that. Anyway, it involves the word duty, and we at least have that going for us. The Howdy Doody Good Times Foundation gave them $50,000, according to 2021 and 2022 tax filings, along with at least $50,000 to the Claremont Institute from HDGT as well, the Howdy Doody Good Times Foundation. It didn't abbreviate it that way. I made that one up, but you could get away with it. It works. In the same report, The Guardian revealed that Cresson of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, appears to serve a key administrative role in SACR. Idaho and Texas company records show that Cresson incorporated lodges in Boise, Coeur d'Alene, and Dallas. Serves as director of the Coeur d'Alene and Dallas lodges. These are empty shell organizations that make them look like they have a network, but, they're moving real money around anyway. And he was named as the principal officer of the parent organization on its 2020 and 2021 tax return. The tax year, 2020-21. The Guardian reported last September that Fisher, a Claremont Lincoln Fellow, another stupid organization that means nothing but is a place to park people and hide money, was president of SACR's Dallas Lodge, and owns a firm that has hundreds of thousands of dollars, who knew, in government ammunition contracts. He also owns another firm that helped produce videos in which Claremont chairman Thomas Klingenstein exhorted right-wingers to join a cold civil war against woke communists. They should warm that civil war up, I think, is their goal. The Guardian contacted Nate Fisher, Skylar Cresson, and Charles Haywood for comment. Neither Cresson nor Haywood responded. Fisher did not respond directly, but on Friday morning on Twitter, left a 900-word post offering some material from internal SACR documents, admitting that the Guardian's reporting has led him to the conclusion that, quote, this is a good time to share more about the organization. Our next section, SACR's mission, dominance and authority in a new aligned regime, whatever that's supposed to mean. Another document suggests reasons that SACR's leadership might want to avoid scrutiny in internal discussions. Civic renewal appears to equate to regime change in America. Oh, so that's what this is about. The document is one of two that Yaner attached to an April 27th, 2021 email sent from his Boise State email address to personal email address. The email text simply says, print. Okay. I don't know whether that's a note to self, print this out at home, or he thought he was commanding a printer to print by typing print in an email. Not really sure. But remember that this is all happening. It's important to note, I think maybe they'll get around to it at some point, but if not, the legal eagles are probably pointing out he's using a state university resource to do all this work. So that's important. The SACR document contains two versions of the organization's mission statement, one public and one internal. That's not so great. Along with a list of objectives for the organization. Its authenticity as a working document is indicated by the current vision that's articulated on the SACR website, which currently features what appears to be a reworked version of the public mission statement. The 2021 document envisions a vigorous civic renewal, now that we know that that's overthrow of the government, that will reflect the past while facing the future, just so you get it all in there, while the website sets out a new thing for a new day, informed by the wisdom of the past but facing the future. That's also gobbledygook. Okay. Each version promises to reclaim a humane vision of society. A harder-edged internal mission statement, however, stands in stark contrast to those anodyne public presentations. Not a humane vision of society, but a brutal and repressive one. Oh, we really should keep this secret. I don't know. Anyway, let's see what it says. It first announces, our aim is to build and maintain a robust network of capable men who can reverse our society's decline and return us to the successful path off which America has strayed. Oh boy, one of those. The document says the organization's founders are unhyphenated Americans, and we believe in a particular Christianity that is not blurred by modernist philosophies, or even Jesus, probably. It says, we are willing to act decisively to secure permanently, as much as anything is permanent, the political and social dominance of their beliefs. In terms of recruiting, the document says, most of all, we seek those who understand the nature of authority and its legitimate forceful exercise in the temporal realm. Kill everybody here. Jesus will forgive you later. Further down, the document specifies 5 organizational objectives that encompass nepotistic business practices, the grooming, it actually says that, the grooming of new and emerging, quote, elites within SACR, and experts say, an apparently insurrectionary political project. But time out, they actually said they're into grooming. How is this not being used? Like, if a liberal organization was raising money for pet grooming, they would say, these guys are groomers, they admit it. And they'd be out with it in 10 seconds. But okay, what can you do? There's more. Let's see. The first objective is to, quote, identify and provide formation, not information, but formation for local elites capable of exercising authority and who are aligned with our goals of complete civic renewal. You know, wink, wink, civic renewal. And warning that concrete temporal achievements not furthering intellectual discussion, right? The second objective is to help those local elites build, quote, fraternal networks which will advance both the members of those networks and our collective goals, including direct preferential treatment for members, especially in business. The third objective to coordinate across the fraternal networks to bring political awareness to matters such as hiring and promotion, award of contracts, internal policies and procedures, and leadership succession. A fifth objective is to collect, curate, and document a list of potential appointees and hires for an aligned future regime, who would likely not be founding participants, but men who grow up in the system, their system. Asked what an aligned regime might look like, Williams, the Claremont Institute's president, wrote it would, more likely than not, be some form of the U.S. constitutional order, but with much higher fidelity to that order before it was corrupted and subverted by modern progressivism. Perhaps ominously, a fourth objective, which they skipped right over, actually to go to the fifth one, is to defend fraternal networks, our own allies, against attacks by those opposed to civic renewal, and strongly deter such attacks, though no details are offered on what form this defense or deterrence might take. We're guessing AR-15s. Although the document makes reference to America's founding, Field, the Niskanen, that's it, fellow, said that it contradicted its spirit. The reference to America's founding, but contradicted its spirit. George Washington, Jefferson, and Madison all embraced religious pluralism very explicitly, and the Constitution reflects that, she said. This is anti-constitutional, and I think many, many faithful Christians would say it's anti-Christian. Barrich, the extremism expert, said the mission statement and objectives were essentially a stealth plan to replace everything about the current government with a religious autocracy, with the addition of an effort to fashion young people, grooming, behind closed doors for the eventual takeover of the regime, right? Now, they're going to grow them up as Christian autocrats, or at least they think they are. It's 5 guys who've started 7 different chapters of a club in which there are no members. That we know of. But if they do show up, we'll give them money and AR-15s, and that's usually attractive as a prospect for the types of lunatics that they're looking to, well, using their own word, groom. Help, we found the groomers, and no one is stopping them. All right, let's see. Other things to add to the mix today, since we have the time. Why not? How about some more further reflections on Supreme Court decisions and the various Trump cases, this time from Lawfare Media, the Lawfare Institute, chiming in on this one. Ilya Somin, whose name came up the other day, George Mason University law professor, or as they say, Antonin Scalia Law School, once Antonin Scalia School of Law, but that abbreviated to ASSOL, so they ended up changing it. You remember. But actually a critic of the court's decision in the Section 3, 14th Amendment Section 3 case. So we got a little preview of what Soman thought the other day, and now a more expansive recitation of it. We got some time coming up after the break to fill it all out. What the Supreme Court got wrong in the Trump Section 3 case. Not that it will matter. Wrong is now right, at least according to the Supreme Court. So we can document the errors just as a historical note. Where did things turn and why? The court botched the legal reasoning and relied heavily on dubious policy arguments, says Professor Soman. Let's read a little bit about it and get ready for our break. The Supreme Court's unanimous recent decision in Trump v. Anderson overturned the Colorado Supreme Court ruling disqualifying Donald Trump from the presidency under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. It does so on the grounds that Section 3 is not self-executing. In a per curiam opinion, jointly authored by 5 justices, including Chief Justice John Roberts, the court ruled that only Congress, acting through legislation, has the power to determine who is disqualified and under what procedures. This outcome was predictable based on the oral argument, which focused on this issue to the exclusion of virtually all other questions at stake in the case, but the court nonetheless got the issue badly wrong. And, oh, well, too bad, because now that's what's actually right, and everybody has to analyze all future cases in that light. That's the problem with doing things this way. Anyway, and also, I should say, they say that the outcome was predictable based on the oral argument. It was unpredictable based on the Constitution before they got to oral argument, because the Constitution and all previous jurisprudence and precedent said, no, this is completely ridiculous. It has no basis in reality. But based on what happened at oral argument, where they said, we don't care about reality, we think we would like to go this way, it was predictable once they said we're no longer going to act predictably, that they were going to come to this conclusion instead of the one that prior precedent would ordinarily have predicted. That's my own clarification. Anyway, Stoneman goes on to say, sometimes unanimity is no guarantee of correctness, and the seeming unanimity is belied by 4 justices' apparent rejection of much of the majority's reasoning. Section 3 states that no person can hold state or federal office if they have previously been a member of Congress or an officer of the United States or a state official and then engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid and comfort to the enemies thereof. By focusing exclusively on the self-execution issue, the court left for another day all the other arguments at stake in the Trump case, such as whether the January 6th attack on the Capitol qualifies as an insurrection, whether Trump engaged in it, and whether his actions were protected by the First Amendment, or whether he received adequate due process, and whether the president is an officer of the United States covered by Section 3. The justices may hope they can avoid ever having to decide these questions, that he had said in the article we read by Soman last week. In my view, Trump deserved to lose on all those points, and the Colorado Supreme Court correctly rejected his arguments on them, but I think he did have a plausible argument on the issue of whether his involvement in the January 6th attacks was extensive enough to qualify as engaging in insurrection. And remember, this is a George Mason professor after all. At the very least, he had a better argument there than on self-execution. That is to say, whether or not Section 3 is self-executing, not whether or not Trump eventually decides to self-execute himself, which is, unlikely, but I would take as a welcome development, even though, supposedly he's a human being with a soul, but I don't know. I can't see it inside all that orange paint. Anyway, at the very least, he goes on to say, he had a better argument there than on self-execution. The court's resolution of the latter issue is based on badly flawed reasoning and relies heavily on dubious policy arguments invoking the overblown danger of a patchwork, patchwork of conflicting state resolutions of the Section 3 issues. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We got a long way to go, I think, in this Lawfare article, but it does remind me that there was published yesterday a New York Times piece under the title of Testimony Fleshes Out Account of Trump's Demand to Go to the Capitol on January 6th, which is, I think, a little bit, at least, relevant to this insurrection question. It doesn't help clarify what the 14th Amendment Section 3 might mean when it says insurrection, but it does, I think, implicate statutory insurrection under 18 U.S. Code Section 2383, which I keep coming back to. The sets on foot phrasing is contained in Section 2383. That's the one I keep coming back to. But this reiterates, this piece reiterates a rundown of just, how insane the January 6th situation was, and the various other things that Trump has done, an interesting exposition of the crimes against him. But at any rate, this is presented today and is much discussed because it's the New York Times offering up an interpretation of the transcript of an interview of a Secret Service agent who drove Trump's vehicle on January 6th, which appears to contradict, and the New York Times seems interested in portraying it as contradictory to Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony before the January 6th committee that Trump somehow battled physically and lunged for the steering wheel of his armored vehicle. Just pointing that out, it is armored. It wasn't the limousine, it was the SUV, but an armored SUV, just pointing it out. And if you're trying to sort out, well, was it an insurrection that day? The president was riding around in an armored vehicle. I mean, that has a different connotation when you talk about it that way. But anyway, this Secret Service agent doesn't say anything about lunging for the wheel and says that the president wasn't yelling and screaming, but he was certainly agitated. There's a lot of things that make it seem like, well, it sounds like testimony that's not particularly clarifying by itself, but is instead intended to sound like it might contradict Cassidy Hutchinson, but doesn't necessarily actually directly conflict with it. Just says, well, I wouldn't say, she says he was yelling and screaming. Well, I wouldn't say yelling and screaming, but he was certainly agitated. Well, okay. Is that shading? I don't know. Anyway, I thought it was interesting just in terms of Section 2383 because of the sets on foot thing and the insurrection mention. And that's the, what was interesting to me was the section right up at the top of the New York Times report in which the way they put it, right, President Trump had just delivered his fiery speech at the Ellipse early on the afternoon of January 6th, setting in motion, I'm going to highlight that part, setting in motion the attack by his supporters on the Capitol. In other words, reflective of the sets on foot idea, right? Setting in motion the attack. When he got into his armored vehicle, wink, wink, after the speech, Trump immediately brought up a topic he had often broached after his public appearances. How big was the crowd? And then gets around to saying, I want to go to the Capitol. So I thought it was interesting that if you take a look at it just this way, that he has set in motion this attack and then wants to lead the attack, arriving via armored vehicle at the Capitol, that does give it the color of insurrection, doesn't it? But then they point out, well, it's really just a glorified limousine. Well, I don't know. I mean, it is, but then again, I also thought about this whole thing. The Ellipse is like a mile from the Capitol, and everybody else walked, he having been, of course, set on foot by Donald Trump in this insurrection. And his Secret Service agents are like, no, we're not going to drive you to the Capitol. But bigly, strongly, and toughly, Donald Trump decided that fate had mastered him that day. The 1 mile walk that everybody else was making was too much for him, bigly, strongly, and toughly. And, of course, normally you say, well, the president can't just walk down the street. There's a danger in having him just walk down the street in a situation like this. But remember, this is a situation that Trump asked for. I want the armed people to be led into the rally. I want the armed people to be part of this march to the Capitol because they're not here to hurt me. I'm not worried. So he's not, right? But when it comes to walking among them, either he's worried about it after all, which actually he could probably use in his defense, or he's just, walk a mile. Are you kidding me? I just could never do such a thing. So, not without a golf cart. So big, strong, and tough, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I just wanted to note that article was out there. Now turning back to Ilya Soman's piece in Lawfare, we left off in discussing or in the middle of going through what he thinks the court got wrong in its unanimous decision, right? No person, it says in Section 3, can hold any state or federal office and then be engaged in an insurrection or rebellion against the same, et cetera, et cetera. And then all of the things that the court ignored and decided not to decide on, which in Soman's view, Trump deserved to lose on just about every single one of them. The court's resolution of which one? The latter issue about self-execution of the section is badly flawed in its reasoning, relying heavily on dubious policy arguments and invoking the overblown danger of a patchwork, there it is, of conflicting state resolutions on Section 3 issues. The court's venture into policy was also indefensibly one-sided, failing to consider the practical dangers of effectively neutering Section 3 with respect to candidates for federal office and holders of such positions. Now, why the court got the law wrong? Under the court's approach, only Congress has the power to determine which people are to be disqualified and under what procedures, at least when it comes to candidates for federal office and officials holding those offices. The majority claims that Congress's Section 5 power to enact appropriate legislation enforcing the 14th Amendment is the exclusive mode of enforcing Section 3. But remember last week he said there's no reason to believe that that's the case. There are several flaws in the court's analysis. The most basic is that there is no good reason to believe that Section 5 is the exclusive mode for enforcing Section 3. As the Colorado Supreme Court emphasized in its ruling, Section 5 empowers Congress to enforce not just Section 3, but also every other part of the 14th Amendment, including its protections against racial and ethnic discrimination, the Due Process Clause, and more. These other provisions are considered to be self-executing under long-standing federal Supreme Court precedent. Section 5 legislation is not the exclusive mode of enforcement for the other parts of the 14th Amendment. Thus, state governments and federal courts can enforce these provisions even in the absence of congressional Section 5 enforcement legislation. Otherwise, As the Colorado Supreme Court notes, Congress could nullify them simply by not passing enacting legislation. Why should Section 3 be any different? Last Monday's Supreme Court decision doesn't give us any good answer to that question. And just as I'm thinking about it here, let me flip through to the 14th Amendment, Section 5. The Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. It doesn't say that the provisions of this article are inapplicable unless Congress enacts enforcement legislation. It just says they can address the issues here further and further clarify them if they choose to do so, but it's not necessary that they do. And the evidence for that, one, the language that's right there in the amendment, and two, the long history of considering all the rest of it self-executing. And up until now, Section 3 also considered self-executing. That's why the Colorado Supreme Court, for instance, came to that conclusion. It wasn't out of thin air. It was always assumed to be self-executing. It just had never been used against anybody before. And then when push came to shove, the Supreme Court said, well, it's all self-executing except this one part here that would hurt Donald Trump. And poof, it was gone. That is a bit of a problem. So, where were we here? As the Supreme Court ruling notes, following its landmark precedent in City of Boerne, B-O-E-R-N-E. I don't remember this one and never learned the pronunciation, but this is the City of Boerne, maybe, versus Flores, a 1997 case. Congress's Section 5 power is remedial in nature. He did mention this last week. Let's see if he clears it up any. It must be congruent and proportional to violations of the amendment it is intended to remedy. If Section 5 legislation is remedial in nature, including when it comes to enforcing Section 3, that implies some other entity, state governments and federal courts, has the initial responsibility for ensuring compliance with Section 3. The role of Section 5 is to remedy violations of that duty, not to be the exclusive enforcement mechanism. That might not be entirely clear, but what I think it's saying here is Section 5 gives you the opportunity to pass additional congressional-sponsored legislation to clear up the situations in which you should be held liable for having broken the law if, for some reason, courts are not enforcing Section 3 and not considering it to be self-enforcing. If they decide it's not self-enforcing, then Congress can overrule you by saying, well, even if it's not self-enforcing, we'll just give you this, or self-executing, we'll give you this legislation that says, well, if you violate this, same terms, but if you violate it, now you're guilty of a statutory violation, if not a constitutional violation. If the courts are going to refuse to do it, then Congress can step in and say, no, you have to, which would be kind of embarrassing under these circumstances. But yeah, essentially saying if there are violations of Section 3 happening and the courts aren't doing anything about it, Congress can say, all right, well, if you don't think that there's a constitutional prohibition, here's a statutory one. But they actually already have done that, by the way, but not with the understanding that the Section 3 is not self-executing, just over and above that they said, by the way, insurrection and rebellion is actually against statute as well. If anything, we go back to saying such purported congressional exclusivity is even more problematic for Section 3 than for other parts of the 14th Amendment. Section 3 explicitly indicates that Congress may lift disqualifications by a 2/3 vote of each house. There would be little need for that provision if Congress could prevent disqualification simply by not passing implementing legislation, or by affirmatively exempting those it wished to protect from any enforcement legislation it chooses to enact. As the three liberal justices, Ketanji Brown Jackson, Elena Kagan, and Sonia Sotomayor, note in their concurring opinion, believe it or not, it is hard to understand why the Constitution would require a congressional supermajority to remove a disqualification if a simple majority could just nullify Section 3's operation by repealing it or by declining to pass implementing legislation. The per curiam opinion emphasizes the need for uniformity in determining eligibility for federal office and argues that states lack the power to make such determinations by saying, because federal officers owe their existence and function to the united voice of the whole and not a portion of the people, powers over their election and qualifications must be specifically delegated to rather than reserved by the states. That from the case U.S. Term Limits Incorporated versus Thornton from 1995. But nothing in the Constitution delegates to the states any power to enforce Section 3 against federal office holders and candidates, says the court. Well, this argument ignores the long-standing role of states in enforcing and adjudicating other constitutional qualifications for candidates for federal office. We've heard this argument before, such as the requirements that the president must be 35 years old and a natural-born citizen of the United States. In 2016, there was litigation over claims brought by Trump supporters to the effect that Senator Ted Cruz, his chief rival for the GOP presidential nomination at the time, was not a natural-born citizen. State courts in Pennsylvania and New Jersey ruled that Cruz was eligible, rejecting the claims against him, and no one doubted that they had the authority to adjudicate that issue. That's weird. In a 2012 decision written when he was a lower court judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit, this got mentioned too last week, Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch upheld Colorado state officials, Colorado of all places, state officials' decision to bar from the ballot a would-be presidential candidate who was clearly not a natural-born citizen. Then Judge Gorsuch wrote that a state's legitimate interest in protecting the integrity and practical functioning of the political process permits it to exclude from the ballot candidates who are constitutionally prohibited from assuming office. This reasoning applies to Section 3 just as readily as to the natural-born citizen clause. But that one somehow is self-executing. In U.S. Term Limits versus Thornton, the aforementioned 1995 precedent relied on by the court, it holds that states cannot impose term limits on members of Congress because they lack the power to impose additional qualifications for holding federal office beyond those specified in the Constitution. But that is not what Colorado did here. The state was merely trying to enforce a qualification that already is in the Constitution, spelled out in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, not impose a new one. Right? There's no term limits in the Constitution. Well, you can't create them, because that's a new qualification for office. Right. And we cite that as reason why states can't simply say, well, you're an insurrectionist, so you're out. That's creating a new qualification for office. No, it's not. It's already in the Constitution. Well, F that. U.S. Term Limits was a close 5-4 decision featuring a strong dissent by Justice Clarence Thomas, in which he argued that states can, in fact, add additional qualifications for candidates for federal office on their ballots, so long as doing it isn't specifically forbidden by the Constitution. Now, this one's explicitly authorized by the Constitution, not just not prohibited, not just not mentioned, but actually endorsed by the Constitution. That is odd, isn't it? Now he says, oh no, what? Oh, that? F that. Anyway, as Thomas put it, nothing in the Constitution deprives the people of each state of the power to prescribe eligibility requirements for the candidates who seek to represent them in Congress, as so long as the issue is term limits, you see. Thomas nonetheless joined the per curiam opinion in Trump v. Anderson. Perhaps he did so based on respect for precedent. He did, after all, lose in U.S. term limits case, right? So there, he's respecting precedent. But the per curiam opinion actually goes further in constraining the states than U.S. term limits did. The former blocks states from enforcing an existing qualification for office mandated by the Constitution, not just imposing new ones. The per curiam opinion relies heavily on a distinction between Section 3 disqualifications from state office and disqualifications from holding federal office. It holds that states may potentially apply Section 3 to the former state office, but not necessarily federal office. They cannot reach the latter, federal office, without specific authorization from congressional legislation. The distinction between state and federal offices is nowhere to be found in the text and original meaning of Section 3. Indeed, as the court indicates in a footnote, at least one candidate for federal office, John Christie, a former Confederate who had won an election for a Georgia seat in the House of Representatives, was disqualified prior to any congressional enforcement legislation. More such cases could easily have occurred if not for the fact that in 1872, just 4 years after the ratification of the 14th Amendment, Congress passed a sweeping Amnesty Act lifting Section 3 disqualifications for all but a few of those covered by them. I wonder if they did so by a 2/3 vote. Probably not. So that's questionable. Anyway, the per curiam opinion also relies on Griffin's case. That keeps coming up. That an 1869 ruling by Supreme Court Chief Justice Salmon P. Chase, who was at that point riding circuit and sitting in Richmond, right, indicating that congressional legislation is required to enforce Section 3. But as the three liberal justices note in their concurring opinion, Griffin's case was a non-precedential lower court opinion by a single justice, albeit the chief, in his capacity as a circuit judge. So this was a circuit court ruling. In the 19th century, Supreme Court justices routinely heard lower court cases in this way. They don't anymore. Rulings that justices issued in that capacity did not speak for the entire Supreme Court as a whole and were not considered binding precedents that later court decisions are required to follow. That is to say, that circuit would be bound by it, but not the Supreme Court. In addition, Chief Justice Chase contradicted his own conclusion from Griffin's case in Re Davis, an 1868 circuit court case involving the treason prosecution of former Confederate President Jefferson Davis. There, Chase held that Section 3 precludes proceedings inconsistent with it, despite the fact that there had not yet been any enforcement legislation enacted, effectively endorsing Davis's counsel's arguments that Section 3 executes itself and needs no legislation on the part of Congress to give it effect. Why would Davis's counsel be arguing that? I don't know, but he did. Next up, the overblown specter of a patchwork. Patchwork! Horror dramatic music for patchwork. The overblown specter of a patchwork of conflicting state decisions. The main motive for the court's decision seems to have been not purely legal considerations, but rather practical concerns, that letting states adjudicate Section 3 will lead to a patchwork of conflicting procedures and determinations, which we have now. But never mind that. The per curiam majority opines that state-by-state resolution of the question of whether Section 3 bars a particular candidate for president from serving would be quite unlikely to yield a uniform answer. Similarly, the concurring opinion by the three liberal justices invokes the menace of a chaotic state-by-state patchwork at odds with our nation's federalism principles. On top of that, some critics of the Section 3 case against Trump have warned that partisan state officials will seek to disqualify opposing party candidates for specious reasons. Texas comes to mind. There are at least some somewhat legitimate concerns, but they are overblown. If state officials or state courts reach unsound or contradictory legal conclusions about the meaning of Section 3, for example, by adopting overbroad definitions of what qualifies as an insurrection or what qualifies as engaging in it, as murdery trader Green advocates, right? Well, if that's an insurrection, then why can't we call all protests at the Capitol? If you come to the Capitol and you silently sit in a member's office to protest the war in Gaza, say, for instance, why isn't that an insurrection? Murdery trader Green says, well, if we're authorized to determine what an insurrection is, why don't we just determine that that is one? All right, well, what if that happens, right? Well, those determinations could be reviewed in federal court, and the Supreme Court could, although maybe it wouldn't because they're idiots, could impose a uniform definition of the terms in question. Indeed, it could have done so in this very case. Non-uniform interpretations of provisions of the federal Constitution by state and federal courts at a lower level can and do occur in many contexts. Settling such issues is one of the reasons we have a Supreme Court. A large part of its docket routinely consists of cases where state Supreme Courts and federal appellate courts have reached divergent interpretations of one or another federal law or constitutional provision. Section 3 challenges need not be any different. Indeed, by the way, I'll add, that's one of the bases on which the court most frequently grants certiorari in petitions to get Supreme Court review. People are always citing, and successfully so, the fact that, well, we have contradictory findings among the circuits. And that's one of the things that the Supreme Court says. Even if we think the answer is an easy one, the fact is that the 11th Circuit says this and the 4th Circuit says that, and we got to reconcile these two things so that everybody is on the same page. That's what certiorari is very frequently used in doing. So they're used to dealing with patchworks all the time. Perhaps Section 3 cases, though, are special because they are more likely to turn on contested factual claims than litigation over age or natural-born citizen status. But not anymore, because conflicting factual determinations about candidate eligibility for office can also arise with respect to other constitutional qualifications for the presidency. For example, there might be disputes over the accuracy or validity of a candidate's birth certificate. Recall, birther claims that Barack Obama wasn't really born in the United States and that his birth certificate was fake. So even, factual determinations like that one can be contested, whether in good faith or not. We've been there. We know that can happen. The same goes for the requirement that the president must have been a resident of the United States for 14 years prior to taking office. There could potentially be factual disputes about where the president lived at any given time. You think it's easy, but, someone could dispute it. The possibility of divergent conclusions on such issues is an unavoidable aspect of a system in which control over elections for federal office is largely left to individual states rather than reserved to a federal government agency. They were just in court arguing that that was the case with the independent state legislature theory, but now they don't like it anymore. But perhaps the framers of the Constitution made a mistake in structuring the system that way. Maybe it would be better if we had a national agency administering all elections for federal office, like Elections Canada, which fulfills that function in our neighbor to the north. He already said that last week, right? But the founders chose otherwise. As the per curiam opinion recognizes, the elections and electors clauses authorize states to conduct and regulate congressional and presidential elections, respectively. That gives state governments initial authority, subject to federal judicial review, to enforce other constitutionally required qualifications for federal office. Section 3 is no different. Even if the 14th Amendment does not delegate states any specific authority to enforce Section 3, such power is inherent in the general grant of authority to conduct and regulate presidential and congressional elections already present in Articles 1 and 2. Concerns about potential patchworks of conflicting state rulings are ultimately policy objections to the Constitution's decentralized state-by-state scheme of election administration. As the conservative justices rightly love to remind us in other contexts, courts are not permitted to second-guess policy determinations that are under the authority of other branches of government, or in this case, the framers and ratifiers of the Constitution. If the court was going to base its ultimate decision in the Trump Section 3 case on a policy consideration, it should have at least have also weighed the practical concerns on the other side, the danger of letting insurrectionists return to power and subvert liberal democracy again. That danger is especially acute in a case where the insurrectionist is a candidate for the most powerful office in the land. Moreover, some degree of patchwork divergence may be preferable to a uniform but wrong resolution of a Section 3 issue by the federal government, or to congressional nullification of Section 3 by inaction. Let's see if we can't just finish up this section here. Anyway, while the Supreme Court ruling was unanimous, it is notable that both Justice Amy Coney Barrett, writing for herself alone, and the 3 liberal justices in a joint opinion, wrote concurrences that seemed to reject, or at least call into question, much of the majority's reasoning. Barrett writes that she agrees that states lack the power to enforce Section 3 against presidential candidates and suggests that the court should have limited its holding to that point without ruling that federal legislation is the exclusive vehicle through which Section 3 can be enforced. But she fails to explain, oh my, we are late on this too. Let's roll that music and get the hell out of here. But she fails to explain how the court could have found a rationale for holding that Section 3 enforcement requires congressional legislation when it comes to presidential candidates that would not apply with equal force to other federal office holders. If the court's reasoning on self-execution goes too far, that's a good reason to reject it entirely. The 3 liberal justices also argue that the court's reasoning goes too far, and they correctly emphasize that the majority has next to no support for its requirement that a Section 3 disqualification can only occur pursuant to legislation enacted for that purpose. If that is their view, they should have dissented. Or at the very least, they should have ruled for Trump on some other ground unrelated to self-execution. Instead, they concur in the result, relying on U.S. term limits and other similar precedents, and emphasize the fear that divergent state decisions might cause practical problems. But as we have seen, these issues can arise with state adjudications of cases involving other qualifications for the presidency. Such dangers can be mitigated by federal judicial review, but to some extent are a natural byproduct of the framers' decision to give state governments primary authority over the conduct of elections for federal office. There's more. We won't get to it, the impact of the court's decision, but we can dive back into that tomorrow. We got the rest of the week ahead of us, and of course, Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next, and I believe he'll be addressing a few other issues.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, so stay tuned. He'll be treating all sorts of things, including this news from overseas. Russia has duped 2 Republicans, with propaganda laundered through fake news sites. Can't believe it. And over 60 RNC staffers, as we mentioned earlier, eliminated in a slow-moving Night of the Long Knives. For more on that, stay tuned. We'll see you tomorrow.